Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are and joining us for this webinar. We appreciate you checking in on this next episode of the COVID at the Margin series from the Presbyterian Church USA. Today, we're going to focus our conversation on immigration and how the coronavirus and COVID-19 have affected immigrants who are in our community. And we have the privilege of having some wonderful guests during this conversation. We will have a DACA recipient who will be sharing her story. We will be having an asylum seeker share her story, and we will have a workers' rights immigrant-led organization also sharing their stories. So this is going to be an exciting time as we walk through how each of these communities have felt the impact of COVID-19 and how they are responding with great resiliency in the midst of that. So sort of lead us through this time, I do have a PowerPoint which will keep us all together and on task. So I'm going to go ahead and share that screen. And we have the distinct honor today of having 3 different national offices who are assisting with the webinar. And I wanted to offer each of those offices an opportunity to introduce themselves. So each of our offices works with one of the presenters today. And so we wanted to give you an opportunity to know who we are in case you wanted to reach out for more information. And so I'd like to give Teresa an opportunity to introduce herself. Teresa?
Hi, my name is Teresa Wagner, and I am the immigration attorney for the National Offices of Presbyterian Church USA. It's great to be with you all today.
And I am Amanda Kraft, and I work with Teresa in the Office of Immigration Issues. I am the manager of Advocacy, so working with folks who want to dig deeper into that piece of immigration issues. Susan?
Hello, I'm Susan Gabriel. I'm the Associate for Refugees and Asylum with Presbyterian Disaster Assistance within the Presbyterian Mission Agency. It's good to be with you.
And Clara.
Hi, my name is Clara Nunez. I'm the Associate for Program for the Self-Development of People. We work with organization, community groups that are owned and controlled by the direct beneficiaries. And I manage the national grant process. Thank you for having us.
And you will see our contact information, our emails on the slide in front of you. So if, oh gosh, I'm sorry, you guys are all seeing my presenter mode. Gosh, here, hold on. All right, let's see if this is going to take care of it. Does that take care of it? All right. To help us sort of be grounded into this, I'm sorry, learning this Zoom stuff along the way with you all. So to sort of ground us in this time, to give us a sort of way of theologically and faithfully being grounded in the conversations we're going to have over this webinar, I wanted to invite Natalie Cushman and Reverend Cindy Cushman, who wrote a prayer last year that I think is really helpful for us to understand sort of the larger issues that are happening around us, not only with immigrants, but for people of color. And so I'm going to ask them to lead us through the prayer. There are, as you will see on the slide, some bolded points. So please feel free to join in unison as much as we can on those bolded points. And I will ask Cindy and Natalie to lead us through the prayer.
We are losing sound. Can you hear us? Okay, I won't worry if we can't hear you. We wrote this lament about a year ago. It's based on Lamentations 1. There is a refrain that's bolded that happens twice in Lament. So when you see the bolded portions, you are welcome to join in and read that part with us. So we will begin. How fractured is the nation that once boasted its harmony? How elusive has become the dream that once made anything seem possible? She that once called for the tired, the poor, and the huddled masses yearning to be free has become a false idol. But how was there ever harmony when she was given to a people selectively labeled human? And the dream was denied to those not swaddled in layers of comfort and privilege. And the call for the tired, the poor, and the huddled masses was meant only for those hailing from the white Western world. For these
things
my eyes flow with tears for a
something blocking her.
far from
It's
me.
far from me.
Okay. For these things I weep, my eyes flow with tears. For a comforter is far from me.
Far from me.
Her origins were rooted in the sin of slavery, with no thought to the road of dead bodies left behind. Her evil was in the God complex that justified humanity blanketly denied. O Lord, look at my shame, for I have made an enemy of myself. The deep veins of racism in this enemy of our own creation continues to disallow free breaths. The safe places for Black and brown bodies keep dropping like flies as they are being killed in schools, killed in worship, killed in the streets, killed in their homes.
For these things I weep, my eyes flow with tears, for a comforter is far from me. Strangers have crawled hands and knees toward all her promised possibilities. She has heard my cry, refusing them her sanctuary, these whom we greet with bars and cages. For these things I weep, my eyes flow with tears, for a comforter is far from me.
See, O Lord, how distressed I am. My stomach churns, my heart is wrung within me, because I have been very callous. In the street, the people bleed. In the home, they face their death.
Let all my evil doing come before you.
deal with me.
I have
Dealt with many because of all my transgressions. For my ground are many, and my heart is faint.
Thank you so much, Cindy and Natalie. We appreciate you sharing that prayer, sort of grounding us in this conversation of understanding how bodies within our system are treated differently. And immigration is one area in which we treat bodies differently. We have the privilege of hearing now from a DACA recipient. Maria Isabel Vanegas is a member of a Presbyterian church in Tennessee, and she will tell her story. She fortunately, it has started a new job today, so she was not able to ask off for the time to be with us, but she was willing to send us a video. So we are gonna listen to her story by video. So I'm gonna pull that up here. And here is Maria's story.
Hello everyone, my name is Maria Venegas and I am a DACA recipient, and I'm here to talk about my journey and my connection to the Presbyterian Church and kind of how DACA has affected my future and my past. So when I was 6 years old, I moved to the United States with my family from Guatemala. Originally, we lived in the state of Colorado, but now we're currently residing in Tennessee. During the time we lived in Colorado, I didn't get to see my parents a whole lot in the beginning because they were both working really long hours to make ends meet. But luckily I had two older brothers who took care of me during that time. And when I first came to the US, I obviously didn't speak a lot of English because I was only 6 years old. So when they put me into first grade, my teacher assigned me a classmate who was my translator. And this little boy had also immigrated to the US, but he had done so sometime before I did. So he had already picked up the language. And looking back, I'm really grateful to have come when I did, because that meant that I was able to pick up the language a lot easier, and I wasn't really embarrassed about not being able to speak English. And you know, I was entering kindergarten, so I believe it was first grade. I was entering first grade, so everybody was learning how to speak English, immigrant or not. Then about 2 years later, we moved to Kingston, Tennessee, and this small town is where we were introduced.
Right. I just heard that you guys were not seeing it. So I'm going to try within PowerPoint to see if it's going to work. I apologize. Let's see if it works this way.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Venegas, and I'm a DACA recipient, and I'm here to talk about my journey and my connection to the Presbyterian Church, and kind of how DACA has affected my future and my past. So when I was 6 years old, I moved to the United States with my family from Guatemala. Originally, we lived in the state of Colorado, but now we're currently residing in Tennessee. During the time we lived in Colorado, I didn't get to a whole lot in the beginning because they were both working 3 hours to make ends meet. But luckily, I had 2 older brothers who took care of me during that time. And when I first came to the US, I obviously didn't speak a lot of English because I was only 6 years old. So when they put me into first grade, my teacher assigned me a classmate who was my translator. And this little boy had also immigrated to the US, but he had done so sometime before I did, so he had already picked up the language. And looking back, I'm really grateful to have come when I did, because that meant that I was able to pick up the language a lot easier, and I wasn't really embarrassed about not being able to speak English. And you know, I was entering kindergarten, so I believe it was first grade. I was entering first grade, so everybody was learning how to speak English, immigrant or not. Not about 2 years later, we moved to Kingston, Tennessee, and this small town is where we were introduced to the Presbyterian Church, which we happened to go to because our neighbors invited us there. Church is our home church, and it was one of the first places where my family and I found a loving and welcoming community. I personally owe a lot to the Presbyterian Church. And one of the things I owe is definitely my passion for intersectionality of different social justice issues. That stems a lot from the doctrine of the Presbyterian Church and Advocacy, treating our neighbors as themselves and welcoming of the strangers. So growing up in Kingston for the most part was a peaceful experience, but there were also some instances where my family and I felt like outsiders. About 6,000 people. So this is just growing up. I was not exposed to many people of different backgrounds, cultures, religions, schools of thought. And so it was kind of an expectation to fit in along with the predominant white culture in the town. And that affects you as an immigrant because the impact that cultural assimilation has on a kid can sometimes be difficult to understand.
Okay, so I'm getting some feedback that the video quality is not great. I'm gonna try one more thing and see if that will help. I need that.
You're beginning to understand.
I apologize. I'm gonna try to close, let's see here, if I close this down. And Teresa, this may be an easier way to do this. Teresa, would you be willing to maybe share it from your computer and see if it'll come up better from yours if you happen to have it pulled up? I apologize for the technology issue, but I will want you to be able to hear her.
Okay, can everyone see Maria?
We don't have any sound with her, Teresa.
You have to unmute yourself, Teresa.
Okay, let me give it a try. That there is a charm. We can. Okay. I think Amanda, you're gonna have to try again. I don't see it.
The audio was clearest when you just had her photo and her audio, so you may just want to go back to that.
Okay, I found it. Let me try that one. Thank you for your patience.
No, we're not getting any audio. Do you want me to try her picture again and then with the audio? Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. We tried this many times before we got this going and it still doesn't work. Okay. All right, let me bring back Maria, and you'll get to see her picture, her lovely picture, and then I will play the video.
Hello, everyone. My name is
Okay. I'm so sorry. This is awful. Okay, here we go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Venegas, and I am a DACA recipient, and I'm here to talk about my journey and my connection to the Presbyterian Church, and kind of how DACA has affected my future and my past. So, when I was 6 years old, I moved to the United States with my family from Guatemala. Originally, we lived in the state of Colorado.
There is a suggestion on Facebook that we can put a link to the video
I think
for
we're gonna
later
have
if you
to.
would like to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. I am so sorry. We will do a link to Maria's video. I apologize for that sort of delay. We thought we had it figured out and we obviously didn't. All right, so we'll move on here. Okay. And we will put a link to her video, but just to give you a synopsis, Maria talks about sort of what it meant to be a DACA recipient in the midst of the legal battle that has occurred around the rescinding of DACA, the anxiety that has created for the nearly 700,000 DACA recipients. And then she also talks about how DACA recipients are really essential to the essential worker piece that keeps this country going during a pandemic. And so that highlights a bit about what has happened to DACA recipients during this period. She also encourages folks to really get out to vote in November and to lift up your voices to members of Congress. Urging people to understand that DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, is not a program that allows a pathway to a permanent solution for those recipients. So really urging people to contact their members of Congress to ask for the passing of the DREAM Act. So we will make sure that that link is provided so you can hear her story. Thank you so much. And now I want to shift to Teresa Wagner to talk a little bit about the different legal changes that have happened, both in connection to DACA and also to what we will hear after her about asylum, seeking asylum in the United States. Teresa?
Thanks. In our opening prayer, we lamented the vast differences between what this country promises and how this country is experienced by so many every day. Immigrants, through changes in policy and the manner in which laws are applied, can find themselves in the margins, out of the margins, and back into the margins again, questioning whether their time out of the margins was just felt or real, whether those holding power welcome them with words or both words and deeds, and always bracing for that moment that they are favored with neither word nor deed. The slide in front of you highlights some of the many changes that folk in the US have endured, some hopeful and some dreadful. And you would have heard from Maria and about the relief she felt with DACA. But then you also would have heard her desire for a more permanent solution. DACA only occurred after 11 years of inaction by Congress. 2001 is when Senator Orrin Hatch, a Republican, brought the first DREAM Act in front of Congress. And 12 years later, when nothing had happened yet, even though that piece of legislation had bipartisan support, that is when DACA was announced. And the difference between DACA and the DREAM Act is dramatic. When DACA was announced, it could only be temporary solution, a temporary deferral that has to be renewed over and over again, and that could be ended by any executive branch at any time. What the DREAM Act would have been was a permanent path to a green card and then to citizenship. We need the DREAM Act. And then you would have heard about her frustration when when DACA was threatened with rescission and the fear that she felt and her family felt during that period of time. And her current frustration that she has knowing that so many essential workers during this pandemic held both the concerns of the pandemic and the concern for their immigration status on their hearts and minds as they served as nurses and teachers and in so many other roles that are so necessary to the health and well-being of all in this nation. And finally, you would have heard that the Supreme Court victory, while a blessing and a miracle, only affords temporary protection, and that at any moment, the administration can try again to go about ending deferred action for childhood arrivals in a new way. So 700,000 people organized, but also bracing for that moment that they are pushed back into the margins again. As we have learned throughout this series, the problem with this nation began at its formation, when those who came before us were able to look upon the humanity in the Americas and instead see folk who needed to be displaced or killed or have their children taken from them. And then they turned their eyes toward the humanity they saw in Africa. And instead of seeing that humanity, they saw folk to be enslaved and kidnapped, renamed, killed, separated from their families. Our common sin is our inability to see one another as people, to see the imago Dei that resides in all of us, as we are all beloved children of the Creator. When we are unable to see this, humanity can do awful things, like only see the use in people, useful for labor, useful as political bargaining chips, useful as somebody to blame. When that use is spent or that usefulness becomes a threat, if that is all that has ever been seen in a fellow human being, humanity can do the most evil and vile of things. We should never look at human beings through this lens. It was this way for Hagar. In the Bible, Hagar was an enslaved Egyptian, a foreigner in the household of Abram and Sarai. Sarai had not conceived, and so she gave Hagar to Abram so that the couple may have a child through Hagar. Things grew tense, though, between Hagar and Sarai when Sarai's plan actually led to Hagar's pregnancy. Sarai, as you can see in this portion of the story, dealt harshly with her, and Hagar was stuck in the impossible situation of being both useful and a threat in the eyes of Sarai. How many immigrants in the US walk in that tension daily, perceived useful yet threatening? How are they mistreated in that dichotomy? And what happens to folk who are stuck in that impossible situation when things become even more impossible, like a natural disaster or a pandemic? You've heard about DACA recipients. Now we will turn to asylum seekers. Asylum seekers are useful to the US in another way. They make this nation feel good about itself. At the end of World War II, our nation, like many others, was ashamed about how we turned those who were fleeing Hitler's regime away from our borders, citing the laws of immigration as we sent them back to their guaranteed death. This nation refused the visa application of Anne Frank's family. We could have saved their lives. We and many other nations mourned those decisions, and we agreed to never do that again. And we became a party to the protocol on the status relating to refugees. And in so doing, we promised not to penalize a person for illegal entry if they were entering seeking refugee status, or to expel a refugee or return a refugee to a country wherein their life is threatened. We carry that banner of pride that comes with such promises, but as is often the case, our word does not match our deed. And we break this promise daily at the US-Mexico border. Things were bad enough before the pandemic. In 2014, President Obama responded to what he called a humanitarian crisis by creating 4,000 new family detention beds for asylum seekers. The court in Flores v. Reno said that those families could not be held indefinitely, however, and so when Trump entered his presidency, he just separated families, holding the mom or dad in one detention center and the child in another. Some of those families have still not been reunited. Then folk were blocked from entering at all, eventually forced to stay in Mexico while their claim to asylum was heard in US immigration courts. People, homeless, and in a nation that was not their own, became even more vulnerable when pandemic hit. Emergency action taken at the border in the name of COVID has led to 41,000 people being turned away in 3 months' time. Many had their hearings processed within 2 hours. New rule changes announced just last week propose to change the very criteria of who qualifies to be a refugee. The definition of a refugee and asylee is housed in the Immigration and Nationality Act. It is law. Though there has been no act of Congress to change that law, there is now an attempt to change its definition by a rule change. When things are bad for folk, in particular folk who are not valued or seen, they only get worse in times like pandemics. But there's hope. When Sarai dealt harshly with Hagar, Hagar ran into the wilderness, and God appeared to her there. God promised her many offspring and named the son growing within her Ishmael. That name means the Lord has given heed to your affliction. God saw Hagar. God saw Hagar living out an impossible situation and far from home. God saw her, God appeared to her, and God comforted her. All of us are loved and able to translate that love and show its expression in the way we see others. We can see one another, whether DACA recipient or asylum seeker or refugee or undocumented. We can see too, just as God sees. And then we can do something about it. You are about to hear from some folk who are doing just that. And then at the end, you will be offered some things that you can start doing yourself.
Thank you, Teresa. And she wrapped up all of those changes so beautifully. And so I want to pass this off to Susan Craybill to introduce our next speakers.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Teresa, for grounding us in both the scripture and our laws, that we do have much to stand on as a nation and as people of faith. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to Irma and to Christy. So much of disregard has been made of our refugee laws and the rights of asylum seekers, and they have real world consequences. No one knows that better than Irma. Irma is an asylum seeker from Honduras who has been in the United States for almost 1 year. She is living with a Presbyterian church family in the Los Angeles area. As part of their commitment to uphold the rights to asylum, churches in Pacific and San Gabriel presbyteries have organized support circles to provide accompaniment services and to advocate in solidarity with asylum seekers. Christy Van Nostrum is staff support for the local asylum accompaniment program, and she will serve as Irma's interpreter. I am deeply grateful to Irma for her willingness to share with you a glimpse into what her life is like as an asylum seeker in the US. As we think of our own stay-at-home orders recently, I want to note that Irma is joining us from her home because Mondays are her ICE check-in days when she must be home in case they call or visit. We have asked Irma to begin by describing what her life was like in Los Angeles before the pandemic. Irma.
Hola. Hello. Yo pues salí de adelanto el 9 de agosto.
I left Adelanto Detention Facility on the 8th of August last year.
Yo tengo mis sponsors que es Cynthia Erickson y Nor Erickson.
And I have my sponsors who are Cynthia and Nord Erickson.
Yo cuando estaba en adelanto fue una vida muy difícil para mí, un momento terrible. Buenas personas, lo que es la iglesia Knox Presbyteriana.
When I was in Adelanto, it was a very terrible situation, very difficult for me. But when I came out to the light, I met a number
acontecimientos que han dañado pues mi etapa emocional.
experienced three very difficult impacts that have impacted me profoundly.
La primera es cuando salí de Honduras, dejando a mis hijos y caminando todo México.
First, having to leave Honduras, leave my children behind, and walk across Mexico.
6 meses en 3 detenciones y las 2 detenciones más.
And then 6 months spent detained in 3 different facilities, the ICE box at the border, 2 detention facilities.
Y la tercera, la pandemia.
And the third being this pandemic.
Cuando salí de adelanto era una vida maravillosa para mí, primera experiencia. Y cuando vino pues esta terrible enfermedad, fue terrible para mí. Y lo estoy viviendo muy mal.
When I left Adelanto, my life changed and things were wonderful. And then this terrible pandemic started and things have just been awful for me.
Los hermanos me invitaban a cenar y con mis sponsors pues teníamos semanas típicas y tenía muchas ayudas cuando iba a la iglesia.
Before, lots of people would invite me out to eat. With my sponsors, we would live our daily life together. And when I was attending church, I would receive a lot of support there.
Yo tengo un hijo que está detenido en Houston.
I have a son who is being detained in the Houston area.
Y su delito es que cruzó la frontera y por 3 veces.
And his crime is having crossed the border for 3 times.
Y a él le pusieron de castigo 6 meses, ya los cumplió y yo no entiendo por qué no lo deportaron.
And supposedly after 6 months deported, but he hasn't been yet, and I don't understand why.
Y cada vez lo trasladan de prisión en prisión.
And they keep transferring him to different prisons.
Y para mí es un dolor cuando me decía, mami, voy para otra prisión. Yo iba donde Cintia, mi sponsor, me abrazaba, orábamos y yo pues me sentía bien.
And when he would tell me, Mom, they're sending me to a different prison, I could go to Cynthia, my sponsor, and she would hug me and we would sit and she would make me feel like everything was going to be all right.
Y ahora que está esta enfermedad, lo han trasladado por 2 veces a 2 detenciones y yo lo que hago es llorar, no puedo ir a que me abracen.
And they've transferred him twice since this illness started. And I can't go and get that hug and support that I once got from my sponsor.
Tengo una hija enferma en Honduras.
I have a daughter who is quite ill in Honduras.
Su enfermedad cada vez es más peor.
And her illness is getting worse and worse.
Y pues yo aquí encerrada, no puedo platicar con nadie, no necesito muchos abrazos de muchos hermanos y no se puede por esta enfermedad.
And I'm stuck here inside and I just sit and cry sometimes and I need someone to talk to. But because of this sickness, this pandemic, I'm not able to go to my sisters and brothers and get that support and those hugs.
Gracias al Señor porque Cristi me ha ayudado con unas donaciones y Mateo 25 me manda comida. Y así muchos hermanos pues me mandan una tarjeta y el equipo también me apoya, pero no es lo mismo.
And thanks be to God, I have people like Christy and the Matthew 25 group, brothers and sisters from the church who are supporting with resources and food and gift cards, but it's just not the same.
Dios es muy lindo porque yo le pedí a él que alguien me ayudara para poder mandar dinero para los medicamentos de mi hija y pues Cristi me avisó sobre la ayuda que el estado de California ha estado dando y yo fui beneficiada, gracias a Dios.
I was praying to God and God is good. I was praying that I would be able to some way send money for the medicine that my daughter needs in Honduras. And Christy let me know about the program, the disaster relief for undocumented immigrants through the state of California. And thanks be to God, I was a recipient.
Y para terminar, lo que yo les quiero decir es que para mí ha sido un impacto muy terrible porque cuando salí de adelanto recibí ¿cómo se dice? Atención psicológica. El equipo me pagó 12 sesiones, lo cual yo me estaba recuperando, pero con esta enfermedad volví atrás, escucho los gritos de las oficiales que nos gritaban muy fuerte y muy feo.
So in closing, this experience of the pandemic has been very terrible for me. And came into this community, I was able to receive psychological attention. The brothers and sisters from the church came together and paid for sessions of therapy for me, and I was really doing well and improving. But now having to be close in, I feel like I've gone back. Those things that traumatize me and hard for me. This in all aspects of my life.
Porque el distanciamiento social es muy fuerte porque nosotros necesitamos abrazos, conversar, recibir consejos, compartir nuevas cosas y eso no se está haciendo y para mí es muy duro.
the social distancing is very difficult because we need to be together. We need to hug, we need those conversations and advice and just to fellowship with one another. And we can't do that right now.
Gracias por escucharme y esto es lo que yo estoy sintiendo por causa de la enfermedad que está abatiendo a todos nosotros.
Thank you for listening to me. And this is what I am feeling as a result of this illness, all of us.
Gracias, Irma. Thank you. I know this is difficult times and know that our prayers are with you. And if we could reach across these miles, we would be reaching our arms to you. For those of you who are joining us today, there is a way that you can support Irma and so many other like her. Amanda, can you go to the next slide? There are going to be virtual asylum advocacy days, July 14th through 16th. The Presbyterian Church participates as part of an interfaith advocacy group. And this is a wonderful way for you to stand with and give your voice to people like Irma. There are 3 basic aspects of the advocacy days: to defund, to take away the money that the government is using to tear apart our asylum policies, to restore the asylum protections that have been taken away, and all the many ways that our government has tried to stop people, deter people from seeking asylum. And finally, to lift up some bills that have been sitting in Congress for a while that try to actually legislatively turn back some of the things that our current government is doing procedurally. You can sign up for these advocacy days. They will help you to develop your own talking points. And it's a wonderful way for us to join as a community in support of Irma and so many others like her. Thank you.
Thank you, Irma and Christy and Susan, for a willingness to give us a glance at what it's like to be an asylum seeker right now in the United States. And it really relates well back to so much that Teresa shared about the legal changes that are happening within our system. And we will offer at the end of our time links so that you could sign up for this virtual advocacy day opportunity. So we'll get to that soon. Next, I want to turn our attention to self-development of people and a partner that they are highlighting their work of.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. Back in 2012, self-development entered in partnership through a grant thanks to the generosity of the One Great Hour Sharing with Fuerza Laboral, with Haney is the director of that program. The program was to build leadership with workers and encourage them to better their economic condition in Rhode Island. And I'm so proud to say that the work now continues and advocating for immigrant justice, fair compensation, and education for workers. So here is Haney, and Stephanie is going to help us with translation.
Buenos días, buenas tardes a todos ustedes. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad que nos brindan en participar en este panel. Nos sentimos muy honrados y queremos compartir nuestra experiencia de lo que estamos haciendo. Fue muy conmovedor el testimonio de Irma, pero Irma, mientras hay vida, hay esperanza y hay que tener fe con Dios por delante que todo sale bien. Y tienes un equipo fabuloso alrededor tuyo. tienes el privilegio porque te voy a contar lo que está sucediendo en la ciudad de Central Falls.
Amy, perdón, tiene que dar espacios para que Stephanie se pueda hacer la interpretación. Gracias.
Sí, claro. Bueno, vuelvo a repetir.
Good afternoon. My name is Jaime Maldonado, and I'm very grateful and honored to be here to share with us today. And I wanted to tell Irma that while there is life, anything can possible. So, and I'm going to be able to tell you a little bit more about my experience through this all.
Bueno, quiero hablar un poco qué es nuestra organización Fuerza Laboral. Como lo mencionó Clara, nosotros estamos en el estado más pequeño de los Estados Unidos, que es Rhode Island, y estamos localizados en la ciudad de Central Falls, que es la ciudad más pequeña de los Estados Unidos.
So, and I wanted to share a little bit about Fuerza Laboral. I wanted for you to know what we do. We are located in the smallest state of the United States, which is Rhode Island. And we are located in the smallest town of the United States as well, which is Stafford.
Nuestra ciudad tiene milla 1.29 cuadrada, es decir, menos de milla y media cuadrada. Y tenemos una densidad poblacional, según el censo del año 2018, del año 2010, alrededor de 19,000 personas viviendo en la ciudad de Central Falls.
And according to the census back in 2010, we have 1.2 square miles and we have a density of 19,000 people.
Y la comunidad hispana representa el 70%.
And the Hispanic community represents the 70%.
Según nuestro alcalde, James Diosa, tenemos un aproximado más de 4,400 personas indocumentadas.
And according to our mayor, James Josa, we have around 4,400 undocumented immigrants.
Nuestra comunidad, pues como pueden ver, tenemos una densidad poblacional bien grande y tenemos pues muchas dificultades con el coronavirus.
And as you can tell, we have a huge density issue and we also have difficulties with the COVID-19.
Considero que una de las razones por las que hay tantos casos de contagio en la localidad de Central Falls es por la cantidad de personas que se ven obligados a salir a trabajar todos los días.
And what I have observed is that we have so many issues with COVID-19 cases because a lot of people have to go out on the streets to resume their work.
Porque deben proveer los alimentos a sus familias y no tienen empleos que les permitan trabajar desde sus casas.
They have to provide food for their family members and they do not have jobs that allow them to work from home.
Y muchas de nuestras comunidades indocumentadas y personas inmigrantes trabajan en la economía de servicio, es decir, industria de servicio, y todas personas han quedado, la gran mayoría han quedado desempleados.
And most of them work as service, different types of service works, and unfortunately, some of them have been unemployed.
Hace aproximadamente 3 semanas atrás, pues lamentablemente nosotros fuimos noticias, nuestra ciudad fue noticia a nivel nacional por ser una de las ciudades de la alta densidad de contagio.
And unfortunately, about 3 weeks ago, we show up at the news for having the highest amount of cases for COVID-19.
Es decir, que en la ciudad de Central Falls había casi 3.5% de incidencia de virus con relación a Nueva York, que Nueva York tuvo un alto porcentaje de 2.1%. Hello.
Oh, there was in comparison to New York that had 2.1% of cases versus us at Central Fork that it was 3.5% for new cases and recases had been happening.
Bueno, como bien saben, las enfermedades infecciosas como el virus se propagan en lugares donde las personas viven muy juntas. Entonces, esa es una de las razones por las cuales Central Fork ha tenido ese gran contagio.
And one of the issues for this type of issue is that they live so close in proximity that can be having to be contagious is an issue.
Las personas tienen que salir a trabajar. Sus trabajos representan la parte importante de hacer limpieza, trabajar en factoría, de cuidar a sus familias. Entonces, realmente las personas no han podido, inclusive las personas que han padecido el coronavirus, no han parado de hacer cosas. Entonces, teníamos que hacer algo con relación a esta situación.
And most of the people work as cleaners, they work at factories and warehouses. Some of them have to watch over their family members. So unfortunately, they have not had a time to stop, and we have to do something about this situation.
Nos juntamos el Estado, las ciudades cercanas de aquí, del área de Blaston Valley, que es la ciudad de Pawtucket, Providence y Central Falls, el Departamento de Salud. Entonces, el doctor Fine tomó el liderazgo dentro de esto. Tenemos 3 veces a la semana llamadas dentro del grupo. Está también el jefe de la policía, el jefe de bomberos, tomando nota de todo lo que está sucediendo y cómo nosotros debemos hacer campañas masivas para informar a la comunidad de lo que tiene que hacer para protegerse. ¿Por qué? Porque nuestra comunidad vive bajo el terror, bajo el miedo, e inclusive tuvimos el caso de una persona que murió en la sala de su casa junto a unos niños. Entonces nosotros no podemos, perdón.
And we also have meetings about 3 times a week with the health department, the fire, and the police to kind of gather all the information that we have and plan massive campaigns for information because people live in fear and terror. And we found out that a person died among his children all by themselves.
Bueno, estamos haciendo campaña educativa de manera masiva, contratando a las personas, también en las organizaciones que dan comida, le pasamos información, manteniendo el distanciamiento social, todas las reglas impuestas por el Estado para protección de todos nosotros, pero lo importante es comunicar a las personas qué es lo que debe hacer, dónde debe acudir, que no tenga miedo por su estatus migratorio, para los cuales nosotros estamos para servirles a ellos.
And we have agreed that we have to focus on education campaigns with especially giving information to food pantries and be able to communicate with the proper social distancing measures and also be able to tell the people that they have somewhere to go and they do not need to be afraid regardless of their immigration status.
En nuestra organización, Fuerza Laboral, pensando de que nuestra comunidad, al no tener documentos, no podía accesar a la ayuda del gobierno federal o estatal por no tener número de seguro social. Nosotros, a través de Rhode Island Foundation y United Way, conseguimos un grant de $70,000 para darle dinero a las personas como parte del alivio. Juntamos este esfuerzo con otra organización que se llama Progreso Latino. Ellos también consiguieron esa misma cantidad y nos juntamos para hacer la ayuda exclusivamente para personas indocumentadas en nuestra comunidad, en nuestra ciudad.
And we were able to find a way for United Way and another organization to provide us with $70,000 exclusively for undocumented folks. And as you all know, because undocumented people do not have a social security number, they do not qualify for state and federal aid. So also with another organization, Progreso Latino, both of our organizations were able to receive a grant for $70,000 each. And that helped to provide a program to help undocumented people in our communities.
Hablamos con nuestro alcalde, con la senadora Sandra Cano de Pataque, y unimos los esfuerzos para hacer una campaña masiva, porque la idea no es solamente favorecer, no es gran ayuda, pero por lo menos un alivio a nuestra comunidad, sino cómo hacer que esta ayudara al resto del estado. Y entonces nos dedicamos a hacer una campaña fuerte para empujar, para que conseguir dinero a las personas indocumentadas en todo el estado de Rhode Island.
And we also could hold conversations with Senator Sandra Cano and the mayor to be able to create a massive campaign to push for fundraising and provide relief to all the undocumented folks among the state of Rhode Island.
Nosotros conseguimos fondos a través de otros patrocinadores, y les quiero anunciar lo siguiente. La gobernadora Gina Raimundo anunció este viernes que ella se dedicaba a hacer una campaña de conseguir alrededor de $3 millones para favorecer por lo menos 7,500 personas, y esto va a ser posible en julio 6 para entonces hacer la contribución de la ayuda.
And I also wanted to let you know that we have gathered sponsors through fundraising, and Governor Gina Raimundo on Friday was announced that there will be an event where we can give 7,500 people different types of aid that will accumulate to $3 million around July 6th. And we're going to be able to have that event.
Nosotros como organización cambiamos todos nuestros programas y inmediatamente hicimos el enfoque para ayudar a nuestra comunidad de esta situación tan apremiante que está viviendo. Dejamos a un lado todo el trabajo que nosotros estamos haciendo para darle una respuesta clara y precisa a nuestra comunidad. Y una de las cosas que nosotros hicimos fue que toda persona de la cual tiene contacto con nuestra organización automáticamente es miembro de nuestra organización sin ningún costo.
And one of the things that we have been able to do as an organization is to focus to help our community in this pandemic specifically. We kind of left on the side the other work that we were doing, and we also welcome each person that was in contact with our organization to become a member without cost.
Porque la idea es que sepan las personas que no están solos, que nosotros estamos allí y no podemos permitir que nadie abuse de nuestra comunidad en estos tiempos tan críticos.
And the main point was to let our people know that they're not alone, and we were not going to allow nobody to abuse them during this pandemic.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias, Katie. Y thank you, Stephanie, for interpreting. What's so interesting about stories that we just heard is the need for us to understand how communities are at-risk communities live in fear and are feeling alone. And how is it that as people of faith, we come together to support one another and find unique ways to be empowered together. And so many of us can be led by those at-risk communities themselves. As we're watching what's happening within our nation in this current point, it's about understanding how systems of power and privilege and white supremacy continue to create the ability to create a disparity that's controlled by violence and exclusion. And what happens oftentimes with our immigrant populations is an additional layer of immigration and customs enforcement monitoring. So it's really important that as we talk about issues of immigration, looking at how our federal government focuses on undocumented communities or those who are in temporary relief situations, that it really is about deterrence, detention, and deportation. So how is it that we can be those examples and ways in which we are encouraging people to be involved and engaging in advocacy and in other ways of service and accompaniment that help provide safe spaces for individuals? And so I wanted to talk through a bit of those pieces so folks could have an idea about ways that they themselves can be engaged through different ways through the Presbyterian Church and beyond. We have a welcome action guide that gives you an opportunity to really think about how to be involved in the wide range of immigration issues, which also includes refugee and asylee accompaniment. So we encourage you to seek out ways to be involved in there, and there's a plethora of information about how to engage there. The Office of Public Witness has a current action alert to really encourage people to talk with their members of Congress about passing the DREAM Act. That legislation has been out there for years. DACA recipients and dreamers, those who weren't able to file for DACA status, are really asking for a clean DREAM Act. What's a way in which we can find a pathway to citizenship for them that doesn't put other loved members of their community in danger of deportation? So really encouraging people to reach out to their members of Congress. They have a script there for you. They have a way that you can contact by emailing your members of Congress. So the Office of Public Witness has that up and ready to go. So please be reaching out. Again, the Supreme Court decision does not mean that DACA cannot be rescinded. And we know that this government is currently working on another way to do that. So please be reaching out to your members of Congress. They need to hear from you. For more advocacy across the board, looking at our page, Office of Immigration Issues Advocacy page, that's a page that sort of digs deeper into some of the issues. And there are also advocacy asks for congressional leaders. And that talks deeper into some of the points that Teresa brought up in her presentation about the way in which the federal government is really trying to limit access to due process and rights that are written into law, and how do we encourage people who have voice to reach out to members of Congress to do that. There's a guide there to help you organize yourselves to do that, so we encourage you to check that out. Presbyterian Disaster Assistance has a toolkit that people can be engaged in accompanying asylum seekers specifically when and during COVID-19. There's some great guidance in there about how to do that safely, how to do it effectively, and how to do it faithfully. So encourage you to look at that. Presbyterian Disaster Assistance has a long history of refugee accompaniment and asylee accompaniment. So we encourage you to look into seeing that. Again, detention visitation has been really affected by the coronavirus. The amount of access that outside visitors have to detained populations has really been restricted. We encourage you to look at Freedom for Immigrants page. They give you some tools in which you can still be reaching out to people, even if we can't be in physical proximity. Irma shared very, very deeply about how difficult it is to be separated from that personal contact. Detained populations are consistently restricted from having that access, and it's becoming even worse within the confines of the coronavirus. And we're also seeing some of the highest rates of transmission happening within incarcerated populations. So again, those are populations to really be thinking about, and the advocacy that goes behind that about release of extremely, especially vulnerable populations. We're always asking for the release of individuals, but really focusing on those really vulnerable populations at this point. The other piece is, again, the focus on the asylum work that the Interfaith Immigration Coalition is doing and signing up for those virtual asylum days to learn how to engage more that way. Self-development of people, which is where Clara works, does wonderful work with at-risk groups, doing their own thing, leading us forward and addressing the problems that they face and the solutions that they see. And part of those are immigrant-led organizations. So please reach out to their page and see and learn more about what they're doing and how to access funds that they have available through the 1 Great Hour of Sharing. And finally, I want to highlight the amazing work that the Fuerza Laboral is doing with workers in Rhode Island to highlight their lives and their needs and seeking justice in the way they exist in this world. And to let you know, we will be sharing the information from this slide so that people have access to this information on Facebook so that you can dive into all those links to learn more about how to engage. So we really want to offer some time for questions and answers. Clara, I'm not sure if anything has popped up, but we'd love to hear if there are any questions for us.
Yeah, there was a question about using the prayer, but we're sharing the whole presentation, so that can be taken from there, right? We said that we're going to be sharing the link to the video. And could this slide be posted on the Facebook page? You just talk about that. Yep.
We really want to thank you all for participating in this webinar. When we first sat down to think about how to even create such an experience, we realized just how vast the theme of immigration is and how much a pandemic affects people who are on the move. Who are in situations where they don't feel secure and safe, and what that means for themselves, their families, and their communities. And so we really wanted to highlight those voices during this time so that you could hear from them about those struggles, but also about their resiliency, the way in which they seek out ways to care for one another and the ways in which we can be involved in that work. It's extremely important that we continue to show up, that we continue to be present, that we continue to be faithful, and that we continue to see how injustice affects so many of our siblings in the United States and along our borders and those who are trying to seek safety within our borders. We hope that you will continue to engage, and please reach out to us with any additional questions that you may have. And again, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us. I'm going to pray us out before we end. So will you pray with me? Loving and gracious God, we know that it is you through the Holy Spirit that moves among us. You call us forth and you call us in and you call us by name to carry your light through this world. May we understand that each of us is made in your image. Each of us is made by your hands, and each of us is made through your great love. Let us understand and see one another. Let us understand and hear one another. Let us understand and stand with one another. May you continue to walk with each one of us. May we continue to hear your people shouting, and may we join in those shouts. May we be the ones transformed to bring about your love, grace, peace, and justice to this world. We pray these things in the one who calls us. Amen. Thank you very much, and be looking out for the recording of the video. Thanks.
Yes, and thanks to the PCUSA Corp for allowing that interpretation.
Yes,
See you soon.
Bye.